let you take over.
Thank you so much, Julie, and I'm really glad what you've been doing to steward and improve the process that we were building at BWorks. So thank you for that.
You set the foundation for sure.
I appreciate it. So what I want to share with you today is that most modern knowledge work is done in teams. And I'm sure most of you on this call are sort of figuring out how to collaborate and continue that teamwork now that we're working remotely. But what we'll also have noticed beyond the challenges of being distant from your team members is that a lot of your organization's people practices were designed with an individual focus. And so if we're trying to shoehorn in a team-based and collaborative way of working in the modern work that a lot of us are doing, it's not fitting with the way that we are currently recruiting, hiring, staffing, evaluating, and leading, promoting our people. So that brings us to a new way of looking at the employee life cycle and the employee journey. This is overly simplified, so I'll just put that caveat out there right at the beginning. But if we think of the journey an individual employee goes on, if they're working in teams, this journey is really about being selected for joining, working in, and leading groups of people as they interact and create products and services together. So if we look at the employee journey from this perspective, we start to think about how can we use design and data and behavioral science to create a team-based organization. And what's so great about the specific time that we're in right now is that this reset and this return to work, as both Nick and David are saying, has necessitated us to think a little bit differently about how our workplaces are designed. And if we can do that and apply this lens on top of the way that we're reworking a lot of our people practices, we can find that it'll reflect the way that work is done a lot better. So starting off on the hiring stage, I'm going to present two different approaches. One, if you're starting out at people analytics, here's some things to start thinking about and measuring. And then on the next slide, we'll talk about going to another level. If you're already there and you want to kind of take it up a notch. So if you're starting out in people analytics, one thing to think about is that we're currently hiring or aiming to hire the best person for the job. And that usually means the best individual person who has their technical skills up to speed, the most experience and education relevant to the role. But if that person comes in to our workplace and they work on a team that they end up spilling over any kind of negativity that they're bringing, or they don't work well with other people, our whole team's performance could actually be worse by bringing in this person who looks really good on their own. If we're able to look at a broader definition of who the best person for the job is by saying it's someone who will work well on our teams and have the requisite technical skills and background, we're looking at a more accurate version of what's going to help our company and our teams to do well. So if you think of what relates to success in teams and team performance, there's some characteristics that you can start to measure in your hiring process, including humility and honesty, people's dependability and conscientiousness, and their social skills. So someone who's going to sort of lift up other folks and contribute to the discussion and really have that collaborative focus can be another set of elements to think about and hire in your process of taking people into your organization. Going to the next level, if we're able to kind of take some more advanced people analytics perspective on this, we can actually look at how a new hire would fit into our team using the information we know about the existing team members and the company, as well as the person coming in. So you can actually, in a way, build teams before all of those people have been in your organization, using both cluster hiring and advanced analytics or simulation-based studies. On the cluster hiring side, there are a lot of companies that have, a class of 2020, class of 21, and bring people in at specific times. Maybe they have a graduate management trainee program and they have multiple people coming in to work together or to work on existing teams. You can see how those people are going to interact in the hiring process and gather data about their personality traits and skills that can help to make these complementary teams where the whole is sort of bigger than the sum of the parts. Everyone's bringing something useful to the table. The second approach you can take at this advanced level is to look at how existing teams are made up, where they have a lot of consistency, where you want to have a diversity of background, and how you can fit in people being hired into that process by simulating the kinds of consistency or the kinds of dispersion that you have between different team members in a group. This is another way to just go like beyond that first stage where we're thinking about how to make our teams as best as possible, as opposed to just optimizing one person. And I'm happy to talk more about any of these advanced approaches in the Q&A or networking later on. At the staffing stage, we usually are thinking about who's available, who's interested in the project. And those are extremely important. I'm not saying to avoid any of that, but there's a little bit more we can take to bring in some other aspects of these team members and staff our teams kind of as optimally as possible. So let's say you're working on a creative problem solving project. We have our maybe product manager leading a team that's creating a new feature for our online services. What you might need in there are people with a very different functional background, people with different educational experiences. And because you want this creativity, you want some people who have a lot of openness and excitement to kind of think of new ideas, but maybe you also want people who can narrow down and prioritize those ideas into something we can work with. That would require having people with different functional background, educational background, and different level of openness to experience or creativity. If you added this to your staffing decisions and you were able to use people analytics to bring these sets of information together with just staffing people who happen to be around or most convenient at the time, you can be a bit more intentional in staffing those teams. If we think of the next level for how to optimize the people that we put together on teams after they've joined our organization, we're able to look at both fault line analyses and profiles of workers to help us make these decisions more easily. On the fault line side, you'll see on the right of the screen that fault lines usually come from big rifts between members of the team that lead to these kind of subgroups or cliques where people don't talk much to each other across those rifts. If you can avoid these in advance by looking at how people in one subgroup might end up having more experience in the company, maybe they're all coming from IT and they also have a lot more education than your folks on the other half of the team that are newer to the company, they don't have as much education or experience, that's going to lead you down the path of really having two separate teams in one. If you could instead avoid those rifts and create a team that has some common elements across their different members, you're going to be able to optimize that team to have less conflict and to be more likely to share information across those different lines. That's one way to go above and beyond in terms of thinking of how I could staff teams that avoid that conflict from before they start. On the profile side, if we're able to collect this information we've been talking about, we can integrate these traits together to look for profiles of who will work together well with other people on the team. So on the right, you'll see one example profile coming from over 100,000 individuals who completed personality assessments. In this case, 50% of people would match what you would see as like a quite positive and pleasant and reasonably average, well-adjusted person. They're a little bit higher on honesty and humility, a bit higher on agreeableness, and they're quite average on things like extroversion, openness, and emotionality. That might tell you that this person would be quite pleasant to work with. This is someone who isn't maladjusted or not going to have a lot of trouble working together with people, maybe because they're not very disagreeable. They're sort of going to help work towards the cohesion of the group. You might want to look at different profiles like this and see where your employees fall and where they can best work together. Now looking at team performance, what we can do is go beyond the technical and individual skills that we focus on currently in performance reviews. So right now, we're having a conversation usually between our leader and their direct report about how that person did on the tasks like they were specifically responsible for. But if they're working in a team, and if anyone's working in an organization, their performance goes beyond just the task-based things that they were focusing on. Their skills actually in being a good citizen of the organization, helping and supporting others, going above and beyond. There are skills that you can evaluate with regards to coordinating and planning collaborative work, because that requires a level of focus that's above and beyond working on your own. And you can evaluate how well the team member is creating an environment of psychological safety for their other members. If they shut people down and make it kind of an unsafe environment to throw in ideas or take risks, then that's going to influence their other team members and have an impact on those people's performance. So if at least what you can do with regards to factoring in teamwork in performance management is we can go beyond a very narrow definition of performance to be very individual and technically focused and take all of these other behaviors and skills into account. At a higher level, I'm really excited to talk about this based on what Julia just brought up regarding network analysis, which is one of the two things we can do to consider teams in a more advanced level of people analytics regarding performance management. So one example, another use case that you can use for network analysis is to look at how well teams are spanning across boundaries and connecting with and communicating with other teams in the organization. So if you see on the left of this network analysis that maybe like a whole organization we're looking at here, there's a lot of folks who are connected to each other, but they're very far away from that central aspect of the organization. It's possible that this ring around the left side of the screen represents people who work in a different location, in a different department, or somehow siloed from other people. You can track this and look at how these teams are really integrated and how their products are doing with the rest of the company, but also how well they're maybe able to serve their internal and external clients based on the information you can learn from these network analyses. On the right side of the screen, we see a visual representation of shared leadership. So if we think about what we can do to bring performance management to the next level regarding teams, what we see here is that team members can each display leadership behaviors at different times. So maybe I'll take over at a certain part of a project because that's more my expertise and I'm going to lead us through this challenge to get to the other side. Others might do that for the next stage after I've handed it off to them. You can actually track and improve how people are showing leadership when they're not even in those roles and don't have the formal position of being a leader. This will help to kind of look for high potential folks from a more objective perspective rather than who we kind of assess as maybe we think they're going to do well, but we don't have anything to back it up. So two different ways that we can explore advanced approaches to performance management in people analytics. Finally, looking at leadership and how we can use people analytics for promotion into leadership decisions. If you're starting out in this 360 feedback approach, I would just start to get feedback from someone at a source that's not the leader. And so often we have a leader evaluating an individual person's performance, but we know that in a lot of modern work that we have leaderless teams, or at least teams where the leader doesn't see what's going on all that often within their interactions. So gathering feedback from other team members can really help to put each worker's performance into context and give more useful information to that leader to have those promotion decisions be based on how they're doing day to day in their groups. At a higher level, you can use this kind of 360 feedback approach to get more information from more sources, because 360, of course, would not be just two different sources of information, the leader and the team member. But in fact, you can look at feedback from peers, from direct reports of that team, from the team's clients or customers, and have this data help you to avoid promoting destructive leaders who are then going to hurt the teams that they manage. So what's really interesting about 360 feedback is that peers and team members at the same level are a lot better at detecting narcissism in an employee than their leader is. You can imagine that's because people can be very good at managing the impression that the leader sees of them, but it's a bit harder to do that with everyone across you at the same level. So if you're able to get those kind of insights from different sources of performance information, you can avoid this snakes and suits issue where we end up promoting people who have all these kind of dark traits and tendencies. Whatever we're doing in the people analytics space, we have some principles that can help to guide us in using people analytics for good. 3 of those are to involve the people who are affected with any of these interventions that we make to help them help us identify the barriers and any concerns they have with interventions we're going to roll out. This can really help with buy-in because people are going to be part of designing that process that ultimately they're going to use and they're going to be affected by in terms of how fair they feel the process is. As always with data, we want to gather data in ethical ways and take a page from the academic book using informed consent for how we're going to use this information, and secure storage that de-identifies certain data so that if we do have a breach, we reduce the likelihood of people's sensitive information being connected to their identity. Finally, a lot of initial people analytics focused on reporting upwards to higher level folks in the organization. This is really important and it's great to help them make better decisions. But what we can also do is democratize the insights we've learned by bringing those back down to the workers that we've been studying and really help them with evidence-based nudges of how they can work better together in their teams and how they can generally improve their performance, their group's performance, and kind of see the purpose for them to be giving us all this data so often. I want to briefly talk about some really exciting research I've been working on that'll also help us in that final frontier or the really bleeding edge of work that I'm doing. And then hopefully we can chat more about that in our networking session. Oops. So in one project we did, we looked at fear of failure in team members and how they performed in their design projects. And we found that when teams on average have members that are more scared of performing badly, they're actually having worse grades on their design projects where they have to come up with new ideas that haven't been created before. In one example, they actually have 1 point higher fear of failure that leads to 2% worse grades on their team performance at the end of the day. This is really interesting because we're able to see that direct link with those objective outcome measures. But this other finding is really cool too. So when the team on average has higher confidence in their innovation, and so they really have that self-efficacy that they're able to innovate and come up with these ideas, they have higher team rated success. And so when we ask every team member to rate how well they performed, they do find that they did better. Now, this didn't have the direct link to grades that fear of failure did. So it's really interesting to see sometimes where we have those objective metrics predicted by some kinds of variables, and other times when we have these more subjective metrics from the team and what influences them. Finally, another project I did for my master's focused on collaboration. And so teams that work together and they are interdependent, they have more productive sort of task-based conflict, and that helps them to perform better. Whereas teams that share a common goal, so they're interdependent on the outcome that they're working towards, that actually reduces their likelihood of getting into these big relationship conflicts, these really personality clashes that are really destructive to the team, and that fewer of those help them to have higher team rated success. So I'm really happy to talk about this a little more because I know we sped right through it. And given all the remote work focus that we have, I want to just recommend that if you are interested in any more of my thinking on remote work and teamwork, that you go to this article link that I have up here, and I can share if anyone's interested, to talk about how we can actually build skills for remote collaboration and communication, and we can bring those strengths and skills back into the workplace when we do return. Thanks so much, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. It went slightly over, so I apologize, and we can bleed that into the networking and after 7 if we're interested.